Let's be honest, productivity in 2025 feels like a competitive sport we never signed up for. Everyone's flexing their AI stacks, their morning routines, their 18-tab Notion dashboards, and yet the stress keeps climbing. For a quick reality check, a recent report found around 69% of remote workers report increased burnout tied to digital communications. So this isn't just a feeling. Maybe speed and constant optimization aren't actually the answers. Slow productivity flips that script. And in this video, I'll walk you through 3 principles, show modern examples, and share a few mistakes I made, so you don't repeat them. And to see why these principles matter, we first need to look at how we've been measuring productivity all wrong. Why our productivity metrics are broken. Not too long ago, productivity was easy to measure. In a factory, you could count how many cars rolled off the line, or how many boxes were stacked at the end of a shift. Output matched effort in a direct way, and nobody needed to ask whether someone sat in a chair for 8 hours straight. The work itself provided the evidence. A longer shift usually meant more goods produced, and that visible connection between hours and results made sense in that environment. Knowledge work, though, doesn't follow the same rules. Writing code, drafting proposals, or developing insights from research doesn't translate cleanly into daily unit counts. In fact, some of the most valuable contributions come after long stretches that look from the outside like little progress is happening at all. The problem began when companies tried to apply those same industrial metrics to digital and creative roles. Without physical products to count, many organizations defaulted to tracking time. Sitting behind a laptop from morning to evening became the signal of being effective, but it never really revealed whether the work delivered results. Presence was turned into a proxy for progress. We replaced results with presence. Green, dots, and reply timestamps became our proof, not outcomes. And that shift created the rise of what could be called performance theater. Work that looks impressive on the surface but doesn't move critical goals forward. Too often, standards like being online, staying available, and responding quickly were mistaken for true productivity. This is why so much of modern work feels like a trap of busyness. In the office, people signaled commitment by arriving early, staying late, or leaving a jacket over a chair. Now, under hybrid or remote conditions, the signal has changed, but the pattern remains the same. Employees keep their status indicators permanently active, inject filler messages into group chats to show availability, and overload their calendars with meetings to display involvement. But what actually moves projects ahead rarely comes from those signals. The tasks that create lasting value, deep concentration, careful decisions, thoughtful designs, often happen quietly and without spectacle. A few uninterrupted hours of focus generate more progress than days filled with constant visibility. Yet we persist in believing measurable hours equal measurable results. Research shows about 81% of remote workers check email outside work hours. A clear sign availability pressure is real. This constant tether to communication systems reflects just how far the metrics have drifted from reality. Instead of enabling work, employees burn energy maintaining the appearance of being busy. It's like pacing around your station on a factory floor just so others see you moving rather than building anything meaningful. Added to this, surveys of leaders show many still rely on hours or visible activity as proxies for productivity, but employees don't see that as helpful. The divide between what management tracks and what actually matters keeps the cycle in motion, and workers are left exhausted from proving they're on instead of supported in producing valuable, lasting results. Over time, this warped measurement system drains people. Every ping that requires an instant reply, every timestamp in a shared file, every sit-and-smile meeting adds another layer of pressure to perform activity instead of creating outcomes. And because knowledge work doesn't have clear endpoints like product assembly, the cycle feels endless. Updates, dashboards, and check-ins can expand infinitely. The culture normalizes busyness as proof of effort, and so the symptoms appear everywhere. Burnout spikes, creativity wanes, stress levels climb. A professional who rushes through shallow tasks looks productive by activity standards, but leaves little of real substance behind. Meanwhile, the colleague who slows down, invests in fewer but higher quality contributions, risks invisibility in the system that doesn't register depth over speed. You see this mismatch most vividly in remote meeting culture. Calendars already brimming with check-ins expand purely because meetings act as visible evidence of work. They can be scheduled, counted, and documented. A calendar with fewer calls suggests inactivity, even though that breathing space often allows for the deepest contributions. The same logic applies to email or instant messages. Quick responses keep one's activity score high, but they come at the cost of shredded attention. When teams encourage constant communication, they end up optimizing for responsiveness, while the work that actually matters lags behind. None of this came from deliberate design. Nobody set out to create a system that diverts energy into surface-level motion. It evolved by default. In the absence of consistent, meaningful measures for knowledge-based work, visibility filled the gap. Presence felt safer than ambiguity. But what displays well from the outside is not always what adds the most inside. That imbalance reshapes motivation itself. Employees focus on avoiding the appearance of slacking rather than pursuing excellent outcomes. Anxiety rises because the game rewards perpetual motion, not thoughtful delivery. And everyone is aware, at least subconsciously, that effort is not equaling results. This treadmill effect is why so many skilled professionals question their own effectiveness, even when they're working harder than ever. They respond to every notification, stay late, and fill empty slots with calls. Yet, real progress feels elusive. Like running without advancing, the effort feels heavy with little forward gain. The cause is not a lack of skill or drive, but a broken feedback system that confuses looking active with being productive. Consider two workers. One spends a quiet week analyzing complex data, then produces a report that meaningfully shifts the direction of her team's work. The other spends that week racing between chat threads, cramming in video calls, and sending endless updates. To the system built around activity, the second appears more dedicated and engaged. But by results, the first has delivered real value. That mismatch explains why so much frustration thrives within modern digital jobs. The outcome is predictable: widespread exhaustion across industries and levels. If productivity is judged by hours and visibility rather than actual contribution, people inevitably fill every gap with movement they hope will be noticed. They reply late into the night, leave devices buzzing constantly, and sacrifice sustained concentration. The deeper discomfort comes from realizing they're investing more and more, yet seeing less and less meaningful achievement attached to that investment. The very metrics they're trying to meet are sabotaging their ability to succeed. At heart, that's the central issue. Our current metrics confuse motion with progress. We inherited systems meant for factory floors and stretched them over work that unfolds in open-ended, creative ways. In doing so, we created frameworks that reward presence and activity instead of thoughtful progress. Until productivity is defined differently, new tools and methods will keep recycling back into the same flawed system, making people busier but not necessarily more effective. And once you see this clearly, another realization hits. The belief that doing more always leads to success comes from the same measurement problem. We assume stacking tasks and multiplying activities will guarantee better outcomes, but the truth often works the other way around. The myth of doing more equals success. I'll bet you know the feeling of opening your laptop with good intentions, only to end up with 23 tabs scattered across the screen. Each one seems like it's tied to progress. An article flagged for later, a project plan waiting to be checked, a shared document left open as a reminder. For a brief moment, that clutter feels like momentum. Your mind tricks you into believing that activity equals progress. But in reality, every tab is just a placeholder for unfinished work, and piling them up stretches your attention across too many fronts at once. It looks like you're covering more ground, but what's really happening is that your focus is fragmented into such small pieces that none of those efforts receive the depth they need. This isn't just about browser windows. It shows up in the way people accumulate projects at work. Saying yes to everything feels like the strategy to prove value. Volunteer for that cross-department committee, take on the upcoming product release, squeeze in one more client proposal. On paper, more responsibilities create the image of higher productivity. But each commitment comes at a hidden cost. It's not only the task itself. Every new responsibility grows branches, status updates, sync calls, progress trackers, chat threads. As productivity researchers and thinkers like Cal Newport note, each new project adds an overhead tax, coordination, emails, and meetings that multiplies the real-time cost. What seemed like a single yes is actually several invisible obligations stacked on top of each other. Think of it like carrying groceries inside. Picking up one more bag doesn't seem like much, but that extra bag might require another trip to the car, a chance of items slipping loose, and a longer time before everything is put away. The additional weight is rarely confined to the extra bag itself. Projects are no different. They're never contained neatly. They bring a trail of surrounding microtasks that don't appear on the surface, but still demand time and energy. And just as too many grocery bags cut into your ability to carry them well, too many projects stretch your capacity until the whole load slows everything else down. The added friction becomes more obvious when interruptions arrive. You might finally reach a stretch of concentrated work when a ping nudges you to switch into an entirely different context. Just as your momentum is building, you're called into a meeting for another project. Afterward, you return to the original work only to find your focus has slipped away. Rebuilding that rhythm costs time you can never recover. Multiply that constant switching across 5 or 6 simultaneous efforts, and the overhead tax devours progress. You stay active, but almost nothing crosses the finish line. Workplaces often reinforce the problem by celebrating the appearance of multitasking. Someone who floods email threads or dashes from call to call looks dedicated. Calendars crammed with meetings project the image of commitment, but those signals can be misleading. They generate shallow, fragmented progress more than lasting results. People who resist the temptation to overload, who concentrate on fewer active priorities, often appear less busy day to day, yet they're the ones delivering the most substantive achievements. The drive to juggle, more ironically, prevents the outcomes we hope busyness will bring. The patterns of high performers make this plain. Whether in creative fields, academia, or technical work, breakthroughs tend to come during focused stretches with fewer moving pieces. Narrowing attention produces stronger results more quickly. At first glance, this seems counterintuitive. Someone quietly focused on writing or design doesn't look as involved as a colleague bouncing between Slack threads and spreadsheets. But the quiet concentration produces results that are complete and meaningful, while the scattered energy leaves behind fragments. The difference is only clear over time. What looks slower at first proves to be the faster route once the work is done. One effective countermeasure is to deliberately cap how many efforts are active at the same time. Keep no more than 2 projects in play, and place every other responsibility in a visible backlog. The backlog isn't abandonment, it's simply deferred attention. By making those boundaries explicit, you avoid the illusion that everything can fit simultaneously. It reframes the choice as allocation, not neglect. Make a public active projects list alongside the backlog and ask managers to approve trade-offs. It forces prioritization and dramatically reduces the overhead tax. When this is transparent, no one can quietly add hidden expectations. Everyone sees that any new commitment displaces something else. At first, limiting yourself may feel risky. Watching peers fill their calendars or add to their responsibilities can stir the fear of falling behind. But after a few weeks, the benefits surface. With only 2 efforts active, deeper focus sessions become easier to protect. Context switching shrinks, interruptions drop, and attention stabilizes. Projects actually get completed, rather than left midway in an expanding maze of half-started work. That visible cadence of finishing creates credibility and momentum, the very things that shallow busyness erodes. Picture someone balancing a client presentation and a feature rollout. With the 2-project boundary in place, they decline a 3rd invitation to join a working group. Their schedule becomes clear. Mornings provide dedicated time for the presentation, while afternoons support the feature. Once the presentation is finished, a new project moves from the backlog into the active slot. Over a month, the number of completed outcomes grows in steady increments. Now compare that to the alternative, saying yes to every new task, scattering energy across 5 or 6 demands, and watching each linger unfocused and unfinished for far longer than necessary. This discipline pays off in more ways than efficiency, because each task carries overhead. Limiting what's active limits that drag. Fewer check-ins, fewer scattered emails, and fewer meeting requests free the mind to settle into deeper concentration. Productivity feels lighter because you can point to where progress is actually forming. The backlog holds what isn't yet possible, removing the constant burden of trying to track everything in your head. The mental relief from this system is as powerful as the added efficiency. Your energy is no longer consumed by distraction and anxiety about what's slipping through the cracks. Perhaps the most surprising benefit is reputational. Managers and colleagues often care less about how many tasks you attempt and more about what you complete with consistency. Delivering finished projects earns recognition more reliably than juggling visible but unfinished work. The public backlog builds trust as well. Requests aren't being pushed aside, they're queued transparently. Saying no becomes easier because it's not a rejection. It's a clear picture of where attention is allocated now and what will come next. So the myth that doing more leads to success collapses when you look at its mechanics. Every new project adds an overhead tax that compounds with scale. Context switching erodes focus. Busyness generates the signals of effort while concealing the absence of results. Keeping commitments capped and showing the backlog openly is not restraint, it's strategy. It reduces noise, makes priorities undeniable, and replaces scattered effort with meaningful accomplishment. But knowing this often collides with reality. Most professionals fear that refusing tasks or setting limits signals weakness or replaceability. The pressure to say yes persists, even as the hidden costs accumulate. That fear, and the culture that feeds it, is the obstacle that keeps many from putting limits into practice. Principle 1. Do fewer things, but do them well. Principle 1 begins with a counterintuitive move. Instead of piling on commitments to prove worth, you narrow them down so that the work you finish has real impact. Doing fewer things, but doing them well, isn't about withdrawal. It's about making the limited time and mental energy you have actually count. In modern work environments, distraction masquerades as productivity. Taking on less is not a weakness. It's the most strategic allocation of focus you can make. When most people hear the suggestion to limit commitments, their first response is unease. In traditional office settings and even in remote roles, professionals often equate their flexibility with value. Every yes becomes a badge of dedication, jumping into impromptu calls, absorbing unplanned tasks, replying instantly to messages. The assumption is that availability equals indispensability. But that mindset is what leads to overcommitment. Instead of enabling you to do better work, it fragments attention. The truth is that saying no is a trade-off, not a failure. The reality is that managers usually aren't trying to overload their teams deliberately. They're under pressure themselves, responding to demands that roll down from above. Because organizational systems still favor visible activity, the easiest choice is to delegate new requests piecemeal instead of safeguarding deep work time. And now, with AI systems added to the mix in 2025, a fresh layer of micro-demands keeps landing on workers' plates. AI tools continually surface suggested edits, draft, replies, or performance nudges. Each ping looks small on its own, but as they pile up, they fracture momentum. Research indicates high rates of burnout, specifically linked to digital overload. Around 69% of remote employees report burnout tied to communication tools. That steady drip of notifications chips away at focus until the whole day dissolves into interruptions. What makes these microtasks so draining is that they are just demanding enough to break concentration while being too shallow to advance a meaningful project. You sit down to tackle an essential deliverable, but hours later realize the day has been devoured by one-off replies, quick syncs, and scattered updates. Nothing substantial was finished. Worse, because so many of the nudges are framed as optimizations, people begin to feel guilty resisting them. Saying no to an AI suggestion feels like ignoring a chance to be more efficient, so they agree, again and again, until the attention debt keeps growing. Here is where the first principle of slow productivity asserts itself. Focus on fewer things, but carry them through with depth. It's not lazy, and it doesn't mean avoiding responsibility. It's an intentional choice to protect capacity for the tasks that actually drive results. Choosing fewer priorities creates the space where effort compounds instead of dilutes. Without that deliberate narrowing, the energy that could power your most valuable outcomes diffuses across dozens of trivial strands. Take a practical scenario. You might be responsible for two meaningful efforts: preparing for a quarterly strategy review and guiding a client through a product launch. Those alone require research, careful communication, and precise execution. Add to that queue a flood of small requests, summaries, quick pings, suggested edits. You try to satisfy them all, hoping to please everyone. What happens? The strategy review and the launch slip in quality. Leadership notices the review isn't sharp enough, the client senses the rollout is sluggish, and ironically, your value decreases. The alternative, anchoring yourself in fewer, better-defined commitments, changes the outcome entirely. You make the two main projects non-negotiable priorities, and you log everything else under deferred status. Then, instead of scattering energy, you aim it at two outputs that actually matter. By week's end, you don't have a trail of half-finished gestures. You have two completed pieces of work that carry weight. The return on that focused investment is tangible. Strategy aligned, client trust reinforced. Of course, keeping a firmer line requires structure. This is where a practical system supports the principle. One of the simplest, research-backed methods is to keep two lists visible at all times: what's active now and what's waiting its turn. Use one shared doc showing active projects and backlog, and when new asks arrive, read them aloud and schedule them. That simple visibility forces prioritization. By laying the workload out openly, you give colleagues and managers a clear choice. Either something swaps in, or it waits. The decision is visible and documented, not hidden or negotiated in passing. That structure brings two immediate benefits. First, it relieves the internal pressure of having to say no on the spot. The backlog becomes a holding space where nothing is dismissed, but nothing takes focus prematurely. Second, it builds trust. When others see that requests remain acknowledged and tracked, they stop interpreting delay as neglect. Over time, they also notice the stronger outcomes you produce when your active list is protected, which makes them more willing to respect the boundary. There's also an important cultural shift at work here. By sticking to fewer priorities, you chip away at the myth that value is measured by responsiveness. You might not attend every optional sync or answer instantly to chats, but what you deliver gains more weight. Colleagues remember what gets finished, not the number of notifications you responded to. Leaders typically notice the difference too, even if they don't always spell it out. Substantial achievements advance the organization in ways shallow activity never can. In addition, this method sharpens how success itself is framed. Instead of judging commitment by how much you agree to, the lens moves to what you finish. The active now plus backlog approach makes the measurement visible. Others can see at a glance what you're working on, what you've finished, and what's coming next. That clarity turns priorities into shared knowledge rather than private negotiation, which helps reduce the constant churn of unclear expectations. For employees, the relief is psychological as much as practical. The mind no longer needs to hold every floating task in working memory. With each incoming request, you simply add it to the backlog, keeping the active workload protected. This eliminates the nagging guilt of incompletion and frees up space for deep effort. Instead of juggling invisible worries across dozens of loose threads, you concentrate deliberately on the valuable few. And by repeating this cycle, the benefits multiply. Delivering consistent, focused results builds credibility. Managers see that when you take something on, it gets resolved, not half-finished. Clients and colleagues experience steady progress. The shift may look subtle on the surface, but the cumulative effect builds a stronger reputation than scattershot busyness could ever create. Ultimately, the first principle is about more than protecting your own time. It's about redesigning how modern work is evaluated. Doing fewer things well puts pressure back on systems that currently reward visible motion. By modeling a better way, you show that quality completion, not relentless activity, defines productive contribution. In environments swamped by endless microtasks and AI nudges, that example stands out clearly. This sets the stage for the next challenge, because when it comes to AI in particular, the same problem of excess commitments emerges again. Tools that promise to streamline work can just as easily flood you with new demands and expectations. That overlap between automation and overload is where many professionals are quietly losing ground. The AI productivity trap. In recent years, one of the biggest shifts in the workplace has been the surge of AI-powered tools promising to make us more productive. But the way many people treat these apps creates a new kind of problem. Instead of asking which ones improve the work they already do, professionals often collect them as if the sheer number signals effectiveness. A writing assistant here, a scheduling bot there, and before long, the number of apps balloons. At first, this feels like progress. Each program promises smoother workflows or faster responses. But once the stack grows, something unexpected happens. Keeping track of these tools, plus the flood of alerts, dashboards, and updates they generate, becomes its own kind of work. Research shows workers using 16+ apps report a drop in focus and missed messages, with around 23% reporting reduced focus. That's the precise shape of the AI productivity trap. Instead of simplifying your day, the stack complicates it. Take a simple case. You add a writing assistant to clean up drafts and cut down on hesitation when starting with a blank page. Impressed? You bring in a transcription tool. Every meeting now spits out transcripts and long lists of action items. That's helpful at first, but you soon realize those outputs need reviewing and sorting, all on top of the real work. Then comes a scheduling bot nudging you toward optimal meeting slots. Add a project planner, and suddenly you're juggling competing timelines. What you thought would save time begins to create a parallel layer of obligations. Not because these tools fail, but because each opens the door to more tasks. The paradox is easy to miss. In isolation, every AI feature does what it claims, removing small points of friction. Drafting feels lighter, transcription gets handled, scheduling tightens up. But by eliminating those barriers, the same technologies encourage volume to expand. More notes, more tasks, more meetings. Once people know you can produce faster, they often expect more output. Expectations multiply even faster than the time you save. So instead of reinforcing meaningful work, the stack makes your load heavier. Thin slices of labor, replacing the natural limits that once helped filter requests. You can see this tension most clearly in team environments. One group might use AI to auto-summarize a meeting, while another applies a different tool to generate project recaps. Someone else gets automated reminders from a separate system. The result? Everyone spends extra time reconciling or cleaning up what the bots produced before actual work can continue. The original promise of automation turns into a second layer of admin. Far from trimming effort, the stack creates disjointed flows that eat into concentration. It's little wonder people describe their AI-augmented workdays as more fragmented, not less. That doesn't mean AI is useless. It simply means the way we adopt it often works against focus. The underlying issue isn't the technology, but the overcollection. You don't need 15 apps to feel modern. You need one or two tightly chosen pieces of support that match your most important outcomes. Think in terms of function, not fashion. If a tool helps free time for your core responsibilities, perhaps writing better documents or managing key scheduling constraints, it has an obvious place. If it just adds noise, it undermines the entire point. Consider a designer who aims to spend most of her attention on refining core visual concepts. Using an AI to handle formatting or streamline brand guideline checks protects focus by offloading busy work. That's aligned use. But adding a new AI idea generator that creates endless templates risks burying her own creative direction under a pile of auto-made drafts. It dilutes value where focus was needed most. One tool supports the main priority, the other distracts from it. Multiplying AI assistants simply because they exist rarely produces better work. Managers face a similar fork. A well-chosen scheduling assistant can streamline their role because that is central to coordination. But layering in multiple bots for drafting emails, producing reports, or polishing dashboards can backfire. Every helpful suggestion has to be processed, edited, or verified. Instead of saving energy, managers spend more of it. Selective adoption keeps focus on what matters. Supporting tools should narrow distractions, not generate an endless stream of new ones. So, what's the rule to avoid stumbling into the trap? Keep the stack tight. Limit your AI use to one writing or idea assistant and one orchestration or scheduling assistant, tools that tie directly to core outcomes. Resist the urge to expand further. This simple discipline mirrors findings from digital overload studies that highlight how excessive platforms scatter attention and fragment communication. Centralizing just a couple of reliable inputs cuts noise dramatically while still preserving the real advantages of automation. This approach shifts the responsibility back onto how you frame priorities. AI can be powerful, but it works best when amplifying goals you've already defined. Enter the day without clarity, and these tools will flood your inbox with suggestions, updates, and signals that drag attention in multiple directions. Start the day with clear objectives, and one or two well-chosen assistants can extend the time you protect for deeper, higher-value work. Think of AI less like a buffet you should sample endlessly and more like a small set of seasonings added with intention. A few choices transform the meal. Too many spoil it. The difference this makes is felt not only in productivity, but also in stress levels. With 5 or 10 competing tools, you live in constant reaction mode, answering notifications, syncing outputs, checking dashboards. With a trimmed stack, time feels calmer. You have room to pause, to think, to shape direction, rather than just respond. By refusing excess, you protect the capacity to do the substantial work that earns trust and builds reputation. In an environment flooded with automated noise, the discipline of saying no becomes a major asset. In the end, the AI productivity trap doesn't come from the apps themselves. It comes from believing that more tools equal more progress. But the evidence shows otherwise. The heavier the stack, the thinner the focus, and the easier it is to confuse busyness with accomplishment. Workers who take on dozens of platforms actually report more missed messages, more pressure, and less clarity on priorities. That's the reality backing up the sense many of us already feel. Tools can drown as easily as they can lift. The way out is restraint. Select a narrow set of helpers that directly reinforce your main outcomes, then ignore the rest. Discipline in tool use is what transforms AI from a hindrance into a genuine ally. Instead of scattering attention, it strengthens it. What takes courage is resisting the visible activity that comes with stacking every new app, and instead choosing a slower, steadier gain that protects attention over the long run. And as soon as you see that clearly, another question comes into focus. Why do we keep pushing ourselves to chase productivity at speeds no human can sustain? Principle 2. Work at a natural pace. Principle 2 is about something most workplaces rarely acknowledge. Humans do not function well at a fixed mechanical pace. We're told that productivity means keeping a steady output from morning until evening, but that model comes from the factory floor, not from the realities of knowledge work. When you're building ideas, writing code, or making strategic decisions, the process doesn't move along in perfect increments. It comes in cycles, periods of deep attention, followed by natural dips where the mind needs recovery. Treating people like machines erodes the very focus that knowledge work depends on. Back in the industrial age, it made sense to measure by the clock. Each extra hour at a machine meant more products on the line. But that rhythm was imported into office culture wholesale, even after the work shifted from manual to mental. The result is what we see now: standard days packed with video calls, status check-ins, and constant notifications, while employees are still expected to output at peak level for 8 straight hours. Knowledge work simply doesn't operate that way. Ideas incubate slowly, clarity comes in bursts, breakthroughs depend on silence as much as on action. Expecting constant pace guarantees diminishing quality the longer the day drags on. Calendars reveal this mismatch most clearly. Many professionals describe their schedules as walls of back-to-back meetings, with no openings large enough to sustain real thought. Instead of a few protected windows for focus, the day fragments into slivers, each too small to produce meaningful results. 8 virtual meetings in one day might give the impression of motion, but by evening the work that matters most is untouched. A better experiment is to defend at least one meeting-free day each week. Protecting a single block this way creates the conditions for deep concentration, which meetings strung across 5 days systematically prevent. Meanwhile, digital platforms add a second layer of fragmentation. Slack, Teams, and email tick constantly in the background, each demanding quick responses. Even if a meeting ends, attention is rarely free. People end up chained to indicators, green dots and timestamps, meant to show presence instead of progress. Gallup data shows remote workers can be more engaged, but also more distressed, so pacing and boundaries matter. Without downshifts from constant stimulation, energy collapses by the end of the week, leaving skilled professionals spent even when they want to deliver more. Productivity researchers find that output actually shrinks under these nonstop conditions. A designer who spends 2 hours on uninterrupted work often accomplishes more than another who spends a full day pulled between digital chatter and meetings. The explanation is simple. Creativity and analysis need immersion. Each disruption resets the mind, forcing it to rebuild momentum from scratch. That's why breakthroughs arrive in rare intervals of focus, not in fragmented slices scattered across the calendar. The most effective rhythm is not steady but pulsed, intense investment followed by deliberate restoration. Making that principle real doesn't require wholesale cultural reform. It starts with smaller visible shifts. Meeting-free days are one. Another change is to establish clear offline hours. For example, choosing a nightly cutoff at 7 p.m. signals that rest is part of the cycle, not an indulgence. The same applies to weekends or designated quiet spans during the day. Boundaries like these normalize recovery as an ingredient of effectiveness rather than a sign of disengagement. When rest is built into a structure, the hours left for concentrated work rise sharply in value. Communication discipline is another lever. Instead of reacting instantly to pings, you batch responses 3 times a day: mid-morning, after lunch, and before signing off. This keeps your deeper projects insulated from constant interference. More importantly, it reframes your reputation. Teams come to expect thoughtful, consolidated feedback rather than fractured replies sent in haste. Ironically, this often makes communication smoother because it mirrors how concentrated thought naturally flows. Even larger cycles follow the same rule. During launches and tight deadlines, intense effort is sometimes unavoidable, but that sprint must resolve into quiet time if it's to be sustainable. The professionals who burn out are the ones who pretend that every week is a sprint. Those who balance phases, allowing recovery to equal effort and importance, are the ones who carry performance forward year after year. Organizations that understand this principle gain from consistency, rather than exhausting people in unpredictable bursts. The psychological challenge is harder than the logistical one. In systems built on constant presence, leaving the desk for a walk feels like slacking. Closing the laptop at 4 after a focused morning feels risky. But comparison reveals the truth. Steady grind produces shallow, error-prone work. Cycles of effort and rest produce originality and accuracy. Since knowledge work is judged on insight and outcomes rather than quantity alone, the higher quality cycle always wins in the long run. For individuals, applying this principle may look like booking blocks of deep work directly into the calendar, treating that time with the same authority as an external meeting, or announcing quiet hours to colleagues so that expectations line up with rhythm rather than fighting it. These steps shift the culture by signaling that availability is not identical to contribution. When practiced regularly, they teach teams to respect energy as a finite resource tied to quality, not an endless reserve to be drained. Taken together, these adjustments make Principle 2 practical and visible. Meeting-free days protect blocks. Offline hours redraw the line between work and recovery. Batch communication shields attention from 1,000 cuts. And deep work sessions anchor energy to projects that actually matter. Each move helps recalibrate time to match how humans naturally operate, not how software and factory models demand. To make it easy, here are 2 micro-practices you can try this week. Cluster your meetings into 2 dedicated days, and protect at least 1 full day as a no-meeting day. Then block 90 to 120-minute deep work sessions during your peak energy hours, following the model many creators use who dedicate Mondays and Fridays to focus while keeping one midweek day for meetings. Small patterns like these compound quickly into major changes in energy and output. Respecting natural pace is, therefore, less about slowing down for its own sake and more about rediscovering how humans think best, through cycles that include recovery as non-negotiable. The result is not a withdrawal from productivity, but an increase in its quality. And once you recognize that daily structure flourishes in pulses rather than linear grind, it's easier to see a bigger pattern emerging, one that operates not just over hours or days, but across whole stretches of time. Seasonality as a superpower. Seasonality as a superpower begins with one overlooked truth. Humans are built to work in rhythms, not in flat, unbroken stretches of effort. The agricultural world understood this long before offices and digital tools arrived. Farmers didn't dig fields every day of the year. They followed seasons of planting, tending, harvesting, and resting. That simple pattern preserved the soil and preserved the farmers too. What mattered wasn't constant action, but aligning the right kind of work with the right moment in the cycle. Somewhere along the way, modern work culture erased that rhythm and replaced it with the expectation of permanent, uniform output. Look at how most knowledge work operates now. Urgent requests arrive every month of the year, regardless of whether a project is in an early exploratory phase or past its critical deadlines. Notifications land at night, on weekends, even during supposed holiday breaks. Many jobs treat every week with equal intensity, even when some phases should demand less. Instead of differentiating between planting and harvest seasons, everything becomes urgent. That lack of natural pacing leaves no room to recover, and the result is exhaustion disguised as dedication. Social platforms amplify the pressure. News streams, recommendations, and trending insights appear every minute, throwing signals of urgency into every season. These feeds don't respect phases of rest. They imply that each day is a sprint for relevance and awareness. The pressure to always stay caught up creates the feeling that slowing down leaves you behind. The consequence is professionals running in permanent harvest mode, pushing at maximum effort year-round, even though human energy isn't designed for that. When every day is treated as equally critical, people burn out early, and the quality of what they produce declines long before the year is through. This is why reintroducing seasonality into work can be a genuine advantage. Seasonal productivity is not about working half the year and quitting the rest. It's about allocating different kinds of energy to different stretches of time. In practice, this means planning blocks for deep, concentrated effort and pairing them with predictable phases for recovery, exploration, or lighter maintenance. Just as soil can't be farmed continuously without going fallow, the human mind cannot produce at its best without rotation. Respecting cycles builds stamina and allows output to sustain itself. A direct way to put this into practice is through 90-day cycles. Try 90-day cycles, quarterly sprints, for one major priority, and treat the following quarter as a lighter season for iteration or learning. This mirrors the seasonal productivity pattern described in the research. In that focused block, pick 1 to 2 central objectives and shape everything else around them. When the cycle ends, instead of immediately launching into another sprint, deliberately shift to tasks that are less demanding but still valuable, such as mentoring, skill building, or shaping future goals. That balance preserves energy for the next deep push. This approach clarifies attention. You no longer ask in the middle of the year, "What should I prioritize now?" The season decides for you. In focus cycles, larger goals dominate. In lighter cycles, reflection and recovery guide the agenda. Just as important, it removes guilt. People often feel nervous when they aren't firing at full intensity, even if they need to slow down. By framing recovery as part of the plan, you legitimize rest as fuel for the next surge, rather than treating it as lost time. Consider a practical case. A policy analyst chooses January through March as a deep focus season to complete a highly influential report. During this time, nearly everything revolves around advancing that single document, data work, drafting, refinement, while smaller obligations are minimized. By April, the paper is complete and ready for use. The next 3 months shift into a lighter phase centered on mentoring juniors, attending events, and exploring ideas more widely. Without the deliberate change, the analyst might chase all of these side tasks while still writing the paper, cutting down its quality and overwhelming themselves. Seasonality transforms the workload into purposeful stages instead of a blur of demands. Teams can benefit from the same cycle. Many technology groups already operate quarterly but often mistake that timing as ceremonial reporting rather than conscious rhythm. By treating each quarter as distinct, one sprints on a feature, another cleans up bugs and balances systems, the team avoids trying to do everything at once. The predictability gives people something to aim for and something to rest within. Schools have long recognized this principle with semesters and breaks, but workplaces often ignore it entirely. Simple cycles can restore that balance. This rhythm also acts as a filter. Without seasonality, every request feels equally urgent. With it, you can assign new tasks to align with the cycle. If a priority surfaces during an intense stretch but doesn't fit that cycle's goals, you send it to the next lighter window. Nothing disappears, it simply waits its turn. This discipline prevents shallow, scattered shifts of attention while still acknowledging that new ideas or opportunities matter. Timing decides when to apply energy, rather than indiscriminately scattering it. Over time, living and working seasonally brings visible patterns of progress. Instead of 12 months of continuous busyness, you can point to specific cycles where one major achievement was delivered, and to other cycles where ideas were developed or recovery was emphasized. This builds a sense of momentum because you track progress in meaningful increments, not just in vague hours worked. The story of your year becomes structured, and that structure sustains motivation. To make it actionable, treat each major project as a deep focus season and build guardrails around it. Plan one deep 90-day objective, publicize it to your team, protect 2 meeting-free days per week during that quarter, and intentionally schedule a lighter learning month after the delivery. The public commitment sets expectations. The meeting-free days protect actual doing, and the lighter month prevents sliding back into non-stop strain. Each step works in sync to make the seasonal rhythm real, not just theoretical. Skeptics might argue that professional life doesn't wait for your ideal rhythm. Emergencies still happen, clients and managers still push. But seasonality isn't about ignoring reality, it's about placing a default pattern underneath it. When urgency strikes, it's absorbed into a system that already values cycles, meaning you know how to recover and reset afterward. The alternative, constant urgency everywhere, leaves no framework for pacing and leads directly to collapse. Seasonality doesn't eliminate pressure, it organizes it. The payoff is visible at all levels. Individuals maintain high standards without draining themselves into mediocrity. Teams operate with clearer priorities, making their sprints feel like sprints, not marathons run daily. Organizations gain durability because their people can re-engage after lighter phases, instead of slowly burning out and disengaging. Seasonal productivity converts scattered intensity into directed progress that is actually sustainable. Reclaiming this rhythm demands more self-discipline than it seems. It requires saying no to extra projects squeezed into a heavy phase, trusting that a lighter season will provide space later. It requires resisting the temptation to fill every spare moment, even in recovery stretches, with more quick wins. And it requires resisting the stream of online signals whispering that every week must deliver headlines. But those who respect the cycle discover that their output becomes steadier, sharper, and more valuable. In the end, treating time seasonally protects work from blending into endless strain. It builds natural endpoints, encourages filtering, and allows you to measure progress in meaningful cycles. Doing so rewires productivity away from non-stop busyness and toward deliberate, sustainable achievement. It gives you more than energy. It restores the chance to create at levels you can actually maintain. And when your rhythm is stable, you're in a far better position to think critically about not just how much you produce, but what kind of work deserves the focus you give it next. Principle 3, obsess over quality. Principle 3 is about resisting the pull of speed and appearances to focus instead on quality. In environments filled with instant notifications, fast outputs, and short-term applause, it's easy to believe that constant activity is progress. But quantity rarely compounds over time in the way that high-quality contributions do. What people remember months or years later are the fewer but stronger pieces of work that outlast quick bursts of relevance. Open any social platform and the pattern is obvious. Quick posts earn likes and reactions in hours, giving their creators the feeling of momentum. The thrill is real, but the impact often evaporates just as quickly. By contrast, a thorough analysis, a polished design, or a durable product doesn't rack up its influence immediately. Instead, these are the kinds of outputs people return to long after the first wave of attention fades. The tension between chasing fast signals versus producing lasting results has become one of the central conflicts in modern careers. The problem deepens because the system itself sends mixed messages. Day to day, professionals are rewarded for visible speed, constant updates, quick fixes, and frequent deliverables. Those metrics keep you looking busy, yet promotions, credibility, and long-term success tend to go to the people who create processes, products, or ideas that truly last. That duality means you can either aim for volume and shallow wins, or risk looking slow while building something durable. Balancing between the two requires not only intention, but the confidence to resist applause for activity. Take a marketing example. One professional floods social channels with quick posts, staying visible every day. Another spends weeks developing a thorough campaign that unfolds strategically. The first looks busy, but their results vanish as quickly as they're posted. The second looks slower, but their work shapes impressions and engages customers long after launch. Over a career, the comprehensive efforts carry more weight. In technology, the same divide appears. Developers get recognized when they squash bugs quickly, but the real leap happens when someone redesigns a system to prevent an entire category of bugs in the future. One creates speed signals, the other creates enduring value. The misconception is thinking that pursuing quality requires endless time. This is where Newport's insight matters. Much of the difference between good and great is an extra 2 to 4 weeks of effort beyond the functional draft. Research-backed examples in the background material highlight that this modest polish window is often what transforms outputs from forgettable to influential. The real discipline is not to delay endlessly, but to dedicate that bounded time to raising a project above baseline. That's why attaching a ritual to quality work helps. After the first functional draft or prototype, set a fixed 2 to 4 week polish window. During that time, you don't restart the project, you refine it. You check data carefully, improve interface details, test, gather targeted feedback, and clean up weaknesses. At the end of that set time, you stop and ship. This practice helps sidestep 2 traps at once: the shallow rush to send something unfinished, and the perfectionist loop of polishing forever. Consider the case of a company preparing a proposal. The one-day version ticks a box, but lacks credibility. The perfectionist overextends in endless revisions, never quite satisfied enough to send. But under a 2 to 4 week polish rule, the draft moves fast to functional, then receives a period of sharp refinement. At the deadline, the proposal is strong enough to stand out, but doesn't consume months of diminishing returns. Using this structure repeatedly builds a cadence: functional first, polish second, delivery third. This ritual creates a compounding advantage. Each polished project stands out in ways rushed outputs can't, and these stronger pieces begin to define how colleagues, clients, and managers view your work. Over months or years, the pattern builds a reputation, not for surface-level activity, but for results that matter. When people recall your name, they tie it to the durable contributions. The small daily tasks, though endless, rarely shape memory or reputation in the same way. The side effect is confidence. Once you've seen that polished projects generate stronger results, it becomes easier to resist the constant pull of shallow work. You recognize small tasks as necessities, but not as the pillars of your career. Instead, you divide attention consciously. Maintenance goes into quick responses, but your reputation is invested in the few stronger efforts you elevate with the polish window. That balance provides both momentum and durability. In practice, the approach looks modest, but pays off quickly. A researcher prioritizes 1 article per quarter, polishes it for relevance and clarity, and sends it out, rather than rushing 4 shallow pieces. A designer commits to finishing 2 major features each cycle to a higher standard, rather than releasing a string of rushed add-ons. In each case, the pace appears slower, but the visible quality creates more impact, opening more opportunities. Another reason to obsess over quality is the compounding value of reference work. Once you've completed a strong report, campaign, or system, it often becomes a touchpoint reused or referenced again and again. Shallow work rarely gets revisited. Quality work extends its influence beyond the moment of creation, multiplying its effect over time while you've already moved on to the next priority. In this way, quality buys you leverage. The challenge is cultural. Reward systems and organizations still track visible activity more than long-term impact. That makes chasing quality feel risky because you won't look as productive early on. Yet this is precisely where strategic alignment pays off. By communicating priorities clearly, here's the core project, here's the timeline, here's when polish ends. You align expectations and prevent the appearance of slowness. Managers and teams benefit because they see both a plan and a delivery schedule, and the higher quality outcomes justify the trust. Taken seriously, obsessing over quality is less about artistic perfection and more about controlled investment. You're not stretching into unbounded months of tweaking. You're trading a modest window of refinement for results that travel further, last longer, and build a stronger reputation. In a world overloaded with constant updates, this shift looks simple, but becomes a major differentiator. The broader philosophy is clear. Sustainable success doesn't come from volume alone. It comes from building a body of work where each piece has lasting credibility. The tactical anchor is the polish window. Draft fast, refine deliberately, and deliver on schedule. Over time, that pattern builds not only stronger projects, but also a more defined professional identity, one tied to outcomes people notice and remember. That leaves one final challenge: protecting the space to even apply this principle. You can't obsess over quality if your attention is consumed by shallow demands, late-night pings, or endless working hours. Without defined limits, quality slips in favor of just keeping up with the flood of requests. This makes the next principle unavoidable: learning how to draw firm boundaries so that the work you choose to focus on can reach the standard it deserves. Boundaries are the new productivity hack. What catches many professionals off guard isn't the workload itself, but the lack of a clear endpoint. In 2025, plenty of people aren't struggling to fill their days. They're struggling to stop. The phone vibrates at midnight with chat updates, emails arrive while they're cooking dinner, and urgent messages pop up late into the evening. Instead of closing a laptop and switching off, work seeps into every corner of life. Research shows about 81% of remote workers check email outside work hours, a signal of just how blurred the boundary has become. Layer on top of that the reality that around 69% report burnout tied directly to digital communications, and the pattern is unmistakable. Perpetual availability is eating into focus as much as into rest. Once boundaries disappear, small intrusions don't feel serious in the moment. You see one message and think it'll take 30 seconds, but before you know it, 45 minutes are gone. You promise yourself you won't work after dinner, then glance at just one notification and you're pulled into another project thread. The danger isn't just the stolen time, it's that recovery windows shrink to nothing. Even when you've technically stopped working, your brain stays in low-level alert mode, replaying unfinished tasks. That's why people wake up feeling tired after a weekend that should have restored them. It isn't inevitable. Digital platforms will always carry a constant stream of updates, but the expectation of permanent accessibility develops out of habit, not necessity. Left unchecked, it creates the illusion that responsiveness proves competence. The truth is the opposite. Without boundaries, the line between effort and exhaustion vanishes. With them, work solidifies into cycles of real focus, genuine rest, and higher quality when you return. Boundaries, more than any new tool, have become the modern productivity hack, the mechanism that lets serious work stand apart from constant chatter. So how do you enforce a stronger edge around work hours? One effective tactic is to build a shutdown ritual at the end of each day. It doesn't have to be complicated. Start by writing down tomorrow's top 3 priorities, which close your email and project tabs and put your phone into Do Not Disturb. Saying something simple like "shut down complete" while you close the laptop reinforces the shift from work mode to life mode. Over time, this ritual tells your brain that the day's obligations are stored safely, not forgotten, so they don't have to replay in your mind while you're supposed to be resting. A second tactic is to automate your off hours. Most phones and laptops already come with quiet modes. Set them to kick in every night at a fixed time, like 7 p.m., and stay on until the start of the next workday. Combine that with a quick note to your team stating when they can expect a reply. For example, "I'll see and respond tomorrow during working hours." The automation removes temptation, and the quick announcement resets expectations. You don't vanish. Instead, you set predictable rhythms for contact that teammates adapt to. These 2 simple moves, shutdown ritual and scheduled Do Not Disturb with communication up front, create breathing room without friction. Of course, boundaries won't cancel every interruption. A true emergency will still land on your desk. But by lowering day-to-day leakage, they reduce the constant drain and reset the culture around communication. Colleagues stop assuming that you're reachable at any hour. Requests get bundled into normal working windows instead of scattered across the night. And you show up fresher and less resentful because rest was protected, not invaded. The hardest part is psychological. Many professionals fear that slowing replies or checking out visibly will send the wrong signal. They equate availability with competence, worrying that managers or peers might see them as less committed. But feedback loops tell another story. Tired, distracted responses after 10 hours online don't impress anyone for long. Sharp, thoughtful communication the next morning earns more respect. Over time, colleagues notice you as someone consistent and reliable rather than stretched thin. Boundaries support trust. They don't erode it. It's also worth remembering that boundaries are not brick walls, they're filters. You get to decide which exceptions pass through. For some, that might mean allowing family calls after hours, but blocking work completely. For others, it could mean permitting a handful of stakeholders to reach you but automating silence on everything else. By tuning rules to fit your priorities, you maintain access where it matters most without letting low-priority noise consume the whole day. The intent is not isolation, it's control. Think about boundaries not as add-ons to productivity, but as its foundation. Doing fewer things well requires limiting noise so there's space to dive deeply. Working at a natural pace demands clear breaks from the grind. Only boundaries create those breaks. And obsession with quality depends on energy. Polish and refinement simply aren't possible if fatigue has been draining you for weeks. In every case, these edges allow the principles of slow productivity to operate. Without them, the other strategies quickly collapse under pressure. Picture 2 scenarios side by side. In the first, you wrap up your work at 6 p.m. You write your top 3 for tomorrow on a notepad, shut down apps, switch your devices into Do Not Disturb, and push the laptop aside. You step into another room, shift your environment, and let the rest of the evening belong to personal life. Sleep comes easier, and when you wake up, the note tells you exactly where to begin. In the second scenario, you leave all platforms open when you carry your laptop into the evening and let notifications pierce every activity. Dinner gets interrupted, bedtime is restless, and by morning the hours blur together into an unbroken strain of half attention. The hours worked don't differ much between the two, but only one system is sustainable. That contrast makes the main point simple. Boundaries turn ambiguous time into defined cycles. They allow you to focus when working, stop when finished, and recover without guilt. Most importantly, they shape perception. Not by making you look unavailable, but by making you show up at your best when it counts. The professional who signals control through boundaries often achieves more, precisely because energy and focus survive into the next cycle. In today's culture, where pressure runs high, rejecting late-night pings or letting messages wait until morning can feel unnatural. But the payoffs compound quickly. Concentration deepens, quality rises. Even relationships outside of work improve because you're no longer only half present. The difficult part is taking those first steps, closing the laptop deliberately, setting the cutoff times and backing them up with quiet hours enforced by your tools. Yet small as those actions seem, they create a decisive break between constant strain and sustainable progress. Setting edges around work changes the game, but it brings up another challenge many ambitious people face. Even when the tools are in place and the day ends on time, it's easy to feel uneasy. The absence of constant responsiveness doesn't just test culture, it stirs up something in ourselves. Many carry a nagging sense that stepping away means neglect, that pausing means losing ground. That inner tension is its own barrier, and it's the next obstacle to confront. From productivity guilt to productivity flow. A lot of ambitious professionals know this scenario. The moment you close the laptop early, silence notifications, or decide to spend a weekend away from the backlog, unease creeps in. It often disguises itself as responsibility, an inner voice insisting you push through just one more email or one more late-night shift to show dedication. In reality, this isn't discipline speaking, it's productivity guilt. And when it drives decisions day after day, it quietly loads on more obligations than you can realistically handle. Rest starts to feel wrong, and work expands into every corner of life until there's no clear boundary left. That guilt doesn't just stretch the hours, it reshapes how the mind works. You agree to projects you didn't want, just to quiet the thought that you might be falling behind. You keep Slack open at dinner so you won't appear unresponsive. You scroll through updates at bedtime out of fear you might miss a change. Each choice feels small, even harmless, but together they cement a state of constant tension. You're either working, gearing up to work, or guilty about not working. That explains why people often feel burned out without technically working more hours than before. The absence of real recovery makes even moderate workloads unbearable. From the outside, overcommitment looks virtuous. The colleague who joins every call, responds on weekends, and pitches in on every project gets labeled a team player. For a while, it pays off. They look responsible, managers praise their responsiveness, and peers admire their reliability. But beneath the surface, guilt, not strategy, is steering their behavior. The result is an unsustainable load. Attention scattered across dozens of minor tasks, recovery time eroded, outcome quality diluted. They remain endlessly occupied, but rarely fulfilled. This is the trap of productivity guilt. It hijacks intention and replaces it with obligation. Rest no longer feels natural, it feels transgressive. And when exhaustion finally surfaces, many interpret it as personal weakness rather than the toxic system at work. They blame themselves, thinking they should cope better, instead of questioning the culture that equates value with endless output. Studies show manager support for well-being reduces productivity impairment by measurable margins. So guilt often signals a leadership or cultural issue, not personal failure. Left unchallenged, guilt convinces people that saying no is negligence, when in fact, recovery is the only sustainable route to consistent performance. The alternative isn't to shut guilt down by sheer force of will. Few can manage that indefinitely. The way forward is to reframe work around productivity flow. Flow doesn't mean forcing peak focus 12 hours a day. It means clarity of rhythm, defining start and end points, engaging fully while on and disengaging cleanly while off. Athletes treat recovery as part of their practice, not an indulgence. Knowledge workers can do the same. Rest isn't an interruption, it's built into the performance cycle. With this reframing, when you're done for the day, you stop without shame because that pause is fuel for tomorrow's concentration, not abandonment of today's effort. A simple experiment can help weaken guilt's grip. At the end of today, write down 3 things you accomplished, no matter how small. Call it your done list. Productivity guilt lives in the gap between what's left undone and what's been achieved. A done list shifts your attention to progress, not absence. It creates closure your mind can accept, making it easier to step away without carrying invisible weight. This 1-minute ritual undermines the cycle of guilt and acts as a bridge into flow. Flow also thrives when planned rest is given the same authority as planned work. The way you schedule a 90-minute concentration block, schedule a 30-minute walk, or an evening with phone silenced. That small change converts rest from a fallback into a proactive part of your system. Instead of collapsing into downtime only after exhaustion sets in, you enter it deliberately at the set time. Over weeks, this rhythm strengthens focus because the mind knows recovery is coming, and it strengthens rest because it no longer feels like stolen time. Rituals make these boundaries real. It could be as simple as jotting down tomorrow's first task before shutting the laptop, turning off notifications, and physically closing a notebook to mark the end of a cycle. These cues tell the brain a phase has ended, triggering a natural reset. Without them, you drift in ambiguity, half working, half resting, never fully in either. With them, you transition into flow, immersed while working, fully detached when stopping. The ritual doesn't just reduce guilt, it acknowledges completion, which gives permission for disengagement. The long-term effect of shifting from guilt to flow is more than lighter moods. It's higher quality output. Guilt fractures focus, you task switch, double-check devices, and tug yourself between competing obligations. Flow grants focus its own protected window, where attention deepens and work gains clarity. It also ensures rest delivers what it's meant to: memory consolidation, creative insight, and renewal of energy. In guilt mode, the brain never shuts down enough to recharge. In flow, it can. Productivity guilt, for all its pressure, actually lowers long-term performance. Flow, though slower by appearances, compounds sustainable value. One obstacle that makes this shift difficult is cultural reinforcement. Many workplaces still broadcast responsiveness as the hallmark of worth. Colleagues equate late-night replies with commitment and quiet hours with neglect. But anyone aiming for long careers must resist the illusion. Burning energy to satisfy false urgency only guarantees fatigue and undercuts the quality of results. Here's where framing matters. If you present your limits as part of your process, complete cycles marked by visible rituals, clear handovers, and steady achievements, others slowly adjust. Repetition shows that you're not less reliable because you stop at 6 or pause during weekends. You're more reliable because your work arrives sharper and more consistent. That's the hidden strength of productivity flow. It builds not only endurance but reputation. You become the person whose boundaries don't weaken output, but rather protect its integrity. Over time, that distinction compounds into trust. Colleagues stop questioning why you weren't on Slack at midnight and start noticing that when it counts, your projects are complete and your input has weight. Flow resets the signal others use to gauge commitment. The real takeaway is that guilt is not proof of dedication. Flow is. Guilt keeps you busy, yet drained. Flow makes you genuinely productive, not just visibly active. A practical step you can take tonight is to write that short done list and then mark an end-of-day ritual, however small, so you detach cleanly. With enough repetition, these acts replace guilt with rhythm, and rhythm sustains both effort and recovery. When this shift is in place, a new question emerges that goes beyond hours and boundaries. If productivity guilt distorted when we work, another distortion shapes how success itself is measured in the first place. The way achievements are tracked and recognized often depends less on what's actually finished and more on how visible someone looks along the way. And that tension sets the stage for the larger challenge we face now: redefining what real success looks like in 2025. Redefining success in 2025. In 2025, success is increasingly defined not by what a person completes, but by how visible they appear while doing it. Hours packed with meetings, buzzing chat threads, and constant profile updates signal activity to colleagues and managers. Busyness has become an outward marker of worth. Yet a full calendar or steady stream of updates doesn't always prove that work moved anything forward. It often proves only that someone kept up appearances. This overemphasis on visibility leaves an important question hanging. What about the achievements that require months of quiet effort? The ones that don't produce instant proof but shape lasting progress? This new pressure loop captures almost everyone who works in a digital context. Posting frequent updates, joining every meeting, or appearing constantly online produces small jolts of validation. Managers nod, peers acknowledge, and algorithms push visibility higher. The recognition feels rewarding, even if the work remains shallow. Over time, the cycle intensifies. The more visible signals someone puts out, the more small rewards they receive, which reinforces the habit of creating even more activity. They look busy, their weeks feel active, but measured in real outcomes, months often pass with little to show. It's pseudo-productivity, surface-level proof of motion without deeper substance underneath. The consequences run deeper than wasted effort. When recognition comes from quick wins, workers naturally optimize for easy deliverables. A researcher chooses light contributions that look active instead of committing to a 6-month study. A designer tweaks features repeatedly instead of tackling the harder, less visible challenge of restructuring a product. These small signals are rewarded immediately, but they come at the expense of the larger, more transformative results. In the long term, output portfolios appear full of activity, but thin in lasting achievement. Part of the blame belongs to how digital platforms now broadcast every move. In decades past, much of real work happened privately. What reached others were the finished results. Today, nearly every keystroke generates a visible trace. Edits in shared documents, status dots in chat, or time logs in tracking systems. Signals multiply faster than outcomes, and cultures begin treating absence from visibility streams as weakness. Workers fill quiet space with shallow actions simply to avoid suspicion. Join one more sync, send another quick comment, post an update, even if none of it connects meaningfully to progress. The ritual of looking active replaces the reality of being effective. A healthier model already exists. The slow productivity perspective reframes success around outcomes that endure rather than activity bursts that vanish within a week. It asks clearer questions. Did a core deliverable actually get finished? Did your effort improve a product or decision in a way others can rely on going forward? Did your contribution alter direction or strengthen performance in a way still measurable months later? One deep achievement outweighs dozens of convenience actions. It may not register on the visibility scoreboard day to day, but over time, it becomes undeniable. Leading research recommends shifting from outputs to measurable business outcomes and human outcomes, things like customer impact and worker well-being, not green dot activity. Deloitte's findings point to the same conclusion. Organizations that measure presence or volume alone risk eroding morale, exhausting workers, and misreading progress. Measuring outcomes aligns with what actually builds durability, impacts customers notice, contributions colleagues depend on, and environments in which employees don't burn out under constant pressure to be seen. Living by this model requires uncomfortable change. It means looking at every block of scheduled time and asking whether the activity actually contributes to a significant outcome or simply proves visibility. It means declining fast recognition loops and accepting the longer delays before durable work is noticed. The discomfort is that recognition loops soothe self-doubt, making people feel safe. Letting them go forces trust in slower cycles of achievement. Yet reputations are shaped more by substantial results than by shallow flurries of messages. It's a trade-off between momentary reassurance and long-term credibility. One practice that helps shift the frame is journaling weekly victories in terms of depth, not volume. At the end of the week, note the smaller number of things that made real difference, such as a design choice that finalized a direction, a thorough analysis that changed a strategy, or a decision that removed repeated conflict. This habit retrains your sense of progress. Instead of checking off boxes for the sake of motion, you identify what would still matter if someone looked back months later. Over several weeks, these notes become a cumulative map. You see patterns in what really added value and which actions consistently resurfaced as forgettable. Maybe you notice that deep dives into research always show up as high value, while reactive chat exchanges rarely do. That record builds confidence, showing you that long timelines consistently yield greater outcomes than accumulated surface motions. The quiet habit counteracts the pull of external recognition loops by replacing them with an internal one: recognition of results with substance. Social platforms and workplace metrics will always highlight volume. That's unlikely to change. But combining outcome-based self-tracking with honest outcome metrics inside teams can reduce false pressures. If managers recognize deliverables by customer results or team well-being, individuals need not race to fill empty space with low-value actions. Measuring results by durability, what carries weight long after completion, gives professionals the freedom to focus longer and deeper without fear of seeming idle. To make this personal, try one challenge this week. Replace one visibility metric with one outcome metric. Instead of counting how many posts, updates, or quick replies you produce, decide on one action that creates measurable real-world impact, such as a client decision influenced, a teammate unblocked, or a system improved. Then review at the end of the week, and if you're willing, share it in the comments. That small swap proves how measurement changes motivation, and it reinforces how much outcomes matter compared to constant small signals. Over time, redefining success this way builds reputations that last. Colleagues remember who finishes significant work, not who flooded channels with updates. Leaders reward steady, enduring contributions, not frantic motion. And individuals feel more grounded because their sense of worth is connected to results they can point to, not to temporary validation that disappears in hours. Visibility still has a role, but it becomes a side effect, not the target. The real target is a body of work that matters. When you free yourself from equating success with constant presence, it creates the possibility of something more sustainable. Fewer but stronger commitments, completed to higher standards with energy preserved for the next cycle. And that realization quickly connects to a bigger truth about productivity itself, that shortening timelines and stuffing schedules may not be the strategy that moves us forward at all. Slowing down isn't surrender. It's the strategy that preserves energy and creates work that lasts. In a world where 81% of remote workers admit to checking email after hours and nearly 69% report burnout tied to digital communication, the case for slow productivity is clear. Constant visibility drains focus. Deliberate pacing protects it. So here's the single challenge. Pick one project this week and apply one slow productivity tactic. Make your active projects list visible to your manager, protect 2 deep focus periods, or commit to a 2 to 4 week polish cycle. Then share in the comments what shifted for you.